It was supposed to be just another high-profile Hollywood fundraiser, a night of tuxedos, cameras, and carefully scripted speeches. The venue, the Orpheum Theater, Los Angeles. The event, Voices for Change, a charity gala blending entertainment and politics, hosted by none other than Jim Carrey himself. From the moment he stepped on stage, the crowd roared. He was in full form, silly voices, wild gestures, sharp political jabs, and then he saw her. Front row. Calm. Composed. Karoline Leavitt. Former White House press secretary. Rising conservative voice. Definitely not a fan of Hollywood's favorite talking points. Jim smirked. "Oh, look," he said into the mic, grinning wide. "We've got someone from the alternate reality department in the audience tonight." Laughter erupted. Karoline didn't flinch. Jim kept going. Karoline Leavitt, living proof that even if you smile hard enough, facts still don't care. Another round of laughter. Phones came up. People started recording. The cameras cut to Karoline. She was still. Expression unreadable. Jim tilted his head toward her like a curious cartoon character. "Tell me something, Karoline. Do you actually believe the stuff you say on TV, or is it just improv? 'Cause I gotta say, it's funnier than anything I've ever done." This time, the laugh wasn't as loud. A few people shifted in their seats. Karoline slowly stood up. She didn't take the stage. She didn't yell. She just walked down the center aisle toward the backstage curtain. The crowd whispered, "Is she leaving? Is she mad? Did he go too far?" But a few moments later, Karoline returned, not to her seat, to the stage. A staff member handed her a second mic, reluctantly. Even Jim raised an eyebrow. "Oh, this is gonna be good," he chuckled. But what happened next? No one was ready for. Karoline stood center stage. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't smile. She looked straight at Jim Carrey, her voice steady, calm, and sharp like cold steel. "You came here tonight to entertain, to laugh, to push the same tired lines about people like me. But you didn't expect me to respond, did you?" Jim blinked. He tried to laugh it off. "Whoa, is this a roast or a revival?" Karoline didn't blink. "You know, Jim, you made a career out of being unpredictable. But tonight, your act was exactly what everyone expected. Cheap shots, empty sarcasm, and a whole lot of projection." The crowd shifted. Phones came up again. But now, they were aimed at her. She paced slowly, never raising her voice. "You mocked me. That's fine. I've been mocked by professionals. But then you mocked what I believe in. You treated conviction like a punchline." She turned to the audience now, her eyes scanning faces. "Let me ask you, what happens when the only people allowed to speak are the ones who make us laugh? What happens when truth is measured by the number of retweets, not the weight of evidence?" Jim tried to interject. "Karoline, relax. It's just comedy." She cut in without even looking at him. "No, Jim. It's influence, and you know it. You're not just a comedian. You're a voice millions still follow. And what you choose to mock tells people what's safe to mock." A hush fell over the theater. Karoline's tone shifted, cooler now, more deliberate. "You say you stand for change, but all I've heard tonight is recycled arrogance, dressed in applause." She turned fully toward Jim. "You expected me to sit there and take it. You thought the punchline would land, and I'd disappear with the rest of the targets you've made careers off of." She took one step closer. "But I'm not a sketch. I'm not a script. I'm a woman who's had to fight for every word she says, knowing someone like you will twist it for a laugh." The audience was silent. Jim wasn't smiling anymore. He opened his mouth. Karoline raised her hand just slightly. And for the first time that night, Jim Carrey stopped talking. Karoline didn't drop the mic. She didn't need to. She simply stepped back, lowered it slowly, and handed it to the stage manager like she'd just finished a press conference. Then she walked off. No music, no applause, just silence. And then, chaos. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. One angle caught Jim's awkward half-smile, freezing mid-joke. Another zoomed in on Karoline's stare, unblinking, unafraid. The most shared clip? Her saying, "I'm not a sketch. I'm not a script. I'm a woman who's had to fight for every word she says." Underneath it, a hashtag trended by midnight. Not your punchline. Twitter was split in two. Progressive accounts called it overdramatic. So now you can't joke about politicians. She played the victim like a pro. But thousands of others, not just conservatives, felt something different. You don't have to agree with her politics to admit she owned that stage. Jim got outmaneuvered by a press secretary. That's art. Even some comedians weighed in. A famous stand-up wrote, "You can tell when someone's punching up, and when they're just punching lazy." She was right to call it out. Meanwhile, news outlets scrambled. Fox News titled it, "Karoline Leavitt silences Hollywood with one sentence." CNN, less enthusiastically, "Leavitt hijacks charity event, turns comedy into culture clash." Karoline didn't respond to requests for interviews, but she did tweet one line that night. "Silence is sometimes the loudest form of clarity." Back in the theater, Jim Carrey sat in his dressing room, hands on his knees. A producer entered. "Hey, we might want to rework the second half. Maybe tone it down?" Jim stared at the monitor, paused on a freeze frame of Karoline looking straight at him. "Don't let it run," he muttered. "They'll either love it or finally start listening." The producer raised an eyebrow. Jim just sighed. "She flipped the room. With words, not jokes. I don't like her politics, but damn, that was real." The next morning, Karoline sat in a cold, overlit studio chair at AM View, one of the country's most watched political talk shows. The producers had promised a fair segment. That was the first red flag. Across from her sat three hosts, one liberal, one neutral, and one who'd already tweeted, "Leavitt pulled a Sarah Palin last night. Cringe and performative." Karoline knew what this was. They didn't invite her to speak. They invited her to slip. The first host smiled tightly. "Karoline, thanks for being here. Quite the night at the fundraiser, huh?" Karoline gave a professional nod. "It was enlightening." The second host jumped in. "Some people say you hijacked a charity event to push your agenda, that you made it all about you. Care to explain?" Karoline didn't blink. "Actually, I made it about respect. When public ridicule becomes the default tool against anyone who disagrees, someone has to say, 'Enough.' That's what I did." The third host leaned forward. "But don't you think comedians have the right to provoke? Isn't that kind of their job?" Karoline tilted her head slightly. "Sure, and I have the right to respond. Free speech doesn't mean freedom from reaction. If you're going to take a swing, don't be surprised when someone swings back, with facts instead of sarcasm." The camera zoomed in. Viewers watching at home didn't see a triggered conservative. They saw a calm fire. The liberal host pressed harder. "You've worked in politics. You know how brutal it gets. What makes this different?" Karoline leaned in. This wasn't policy debate. It was mockery of beliefs, of integrity. "I didn't respond as a Republican. I responded as a woman tired of watching arrogance masquerade as bravery. The studio was silent for a second longer than expected. Then the neutral host, clearly impressed, spoke up. You know, I don't always agree with your side, but last night, you held your ground. Karoline didn't smile. I didn't go there to fight. I went there thinking I'd listen, maybe even laugh. But when the jokes got lazy, and the crowd clapped anyway, I realized silence wasn't strength anymore. Speaking up was. Backstage, a producer muttered, Well, we didn't break her. Another replied, Nope. We gave her a bigger microphone. The auditorium at Eastbrook University was packed. Students filled every seat. Faculty lined the walls. Even the local press showed up. The poster outside read, Guest Speaker, Caroline Leavitt, on Public Discourse, Boundaries, and the Power of Words. But the crowd didn't just come for insight. They came for fireworks. As Karoline took the stage, she scanned the audience. Front row, a group of students in black hoodies, arms crossed. Signs leaned against their seats. Free speech isn't a shield. She's not welcome. Comedy over control. Karoline didn't flinch. She opened with a calm smile. I was told this campus values honest dialogue. That's why I'm here. Not to be agreed with, but to be heard. A few claps, some eye rolls, phones raised, ready for her to slip. Midway through her talk, a student stood up, loud and clear. You talk about respect, but don't you think calling out a comedian was just censorship in disguise? The crowd murmured. Karoline nodded. Great question. But let's be clear, censorship is silencing. I didn't silence anyone. I used my own voice. And guess what? You're using yours right now. That's not censorship. That's what freedom looks like. A few students clapped, surprised by her tone. The protesters didn't budge. Another student shouted, What gives you the right to crash a stage and take over someone else's moment? Karoline's voice didn't rise. The same right you're using to interrupt now. Difference is, when I spoke, I didn't shut anyone down. I added a perspective that wasn't invited, but needed to be heard. The auditorium shifted. The tension didn't vanish, but it listened. Karoline took a breath. I didn't go to that event to make a scene, but when someone in power uses a joke to mock belief, identity, and conviction, that's no longer comedy. That's signaling what society says is okay to ridicule. And I chose to answer back. One of the protesters lowered their sign. Another took a quiet video, no longer mocking, just curious. As she closed her talk, Karoline looked out over the sea of expressions, challenging, curious, quiet. I'm not here to be your favorite speaker. I'm here to remind you, the loudest person in the room isn't always the bravest. Sometimes, it's the one who dares to answer back without shouting. And with that, she left the stage. Not with cheers, not with boos, but with something deeper. Reflection. Karoline was back in D.C., catching her breath after the university event, when her phone buzzed with an unknown L.A. number. She let it ring once, twice, then answered, expecting a reporter. Instead, a calm voice said, Hi, Ms. Leavitt. I'm with Jim Carrey's team. He'd like to speak, on the record, together, tomorrow, on live broadcast. She paused. Is this a setup? Not at all. He saw the clips. He knows the conversation's not over. He'd rather continue it face to face than from behind a joke. Karoline leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. Fine. One condition. I'm not there to smile and nod. We'd expect nothing less. The next evening, they met on neutral ground. The Summit Room, a private media venue in New York known for uncut, unfiltered discussions. No moderators, just 2 microphones, 2 chairs, and over 10 million live viewers tuned in online. The lights came up. Jim walked in first, looking tired. Not defeated, just less animated. Less Ace Ventura, more real. Karoline followed, face unreadable, calm as ever. They sat. Silence. Then Jim leaned in. Let me start by saying, you hit harder than most of my critics, and you didn't even raise your voice. The audience chuckled lightly. Karoline didn't flinch. That's because I wasn't performing. Jim nodded slowly. I've been doing this for decades. And somewhere along the way, I forgot the difference between punching through the noise and punching down. She tilted her head. Is this your version of an apology? He hesitated, then said it. It's me owning what I did. I made you the target instead of engaging your ideas. That's not comedy. That's cowardice with a mic. Karoline looked out at the quiet audience. It's not about me. It's about a culture that claps at every cheap shot, but falls silent when someone pushes back with substance. Jim smiled faintly. So what now? We go our separate ways, or we do something bigger? She considered it. That depends. Are you done entertaining the crowd, or ready to start challenging them? A long pause. Then Jim leaned into his mic. You challenged me, Karoline, and I'd be a fool not to admit you might have just made me better. The stream chat lit up like wildfire. Not Your Punchline trended again, but this time next to dark shared stage. Karoline stood first. This wasn't about winning. It was about reminding people you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the calmest voice shakes the room the hardest. She walked off. And Jim? He sat quietly, watching her go. It had been 2 days since the live broadcast. Karoline hadn't checked her inbox. She didn't have to. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Offers from national news networks, requests to write op-eds, invitations to speak at major political conferences. But one envelope stood out. No return address. No subject. Inside, a single handwritten note, carefully folded. You didn't just confront the stage. You showed us what grace looks like under fire. That's the kind of voice this generation needs, not just in D.C., but in real life. It was signed. Ellie Karoline sat down slowly. She hadn't heard that name in years. Ellie was her college roommate. They'd once debated until 3 a.m. over everything: faith, family, politics. They parted ways when Karoline joined the Trump administration. Ellie leaned left, deep left, and never called again. Until now. A second note came with it, a short card in the same handwriting. I'm a high school teacher now. My girls watched your speech in class. They didn't all agree with you, but they said one thing. She looked like she believed every word. Come visit sometime. Speak to the next group of voices. Karoline folded the note carefully. She'd faced hosts, hecklers, even celebrities. But this was something different. This was impact without a podium. Nicholas walked in, holding their coffee mugs. You good? He asked, handing her one. Karoline nodded, showing him the card. He read it, smiled. Guess you're reaching more than just the crowd now. She looked out the window at the D.C. skyline. Maybe it was never about the crowd. Maybe it was about whoever's still listening, even after the mic's off. Later that week, she flew out to a quiet town in Vermont. No cameras, no headlines, just Karoline, a small school library, and 20 teenage girls waiting with eyes wide and notebooks ready. She started by asking a simple question. How many of you have ever stayed silent? just to avoid being misunderstood. Every hand went up. Karoline smiled gently. Then, maybe we've all been each other's punchline. And maybe it's time to stop. The room was quiet, but not out of fear, out of reflection. The invitation came sealed with gold trim and an official wax stamp. Civic Courage Awards, honoring voices that dare. Karoline almost didn't go. I don't do award shows, she told Nicholas, but he smirked. You didn't do fundraisers either, until you shut one down with a single sentence. She sighed. Fair point. The night of the event, the grand ballroom buzzed with media, politicians, celebrities. Karoline walked in wearing a sharp navy dress, her silver pendant resting above her collarbone. The host read from the podium. Our next honoree spoke not with volume, but with vision. She reminded us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to stay seated. The crowd clapped. Karoline stood. But before she reached the stage, the host added, to present this award, a fellow voice who knows what it means to make mistakes and face them. From the curtain emerged Jim Carrey. The room tensed, a few gasps, cameras snapped, even Karoline blinked. Jim walked slowly to the mic. He didn't smile big. He didn't joke. A few months ago, I thought courage was standing alone with a punchline, but then someone challenged me, with truth instead of noise. He glanced at Karoline. She didn't try to cancel me. She called me out, like an equal, and it made me stop, listen, grow. He picked up the award, etched glass, glowing in the stage light. Karoline Leavitt reminded us all that power doesn't always yell. Sometimes it whispers and changes the room anyway. He extended it toward her. For a second, just one, Karoline hesitated. Then she took the award. They shook hands, and the room rose to its feet. Karoline approached the mic, her voice calm and clear. Courage doesn't mean you never get laughed at. It means you answer back anyway, not to win, but to remind the world that truth doesn't fear a joke. It rises above it. She looked over at Jim, who gave a simple, genuine nod. Tonight isn't about me. It's about what happens when two people stop throwing shadows and start sharing the light. That clip alone crossed 15 million views in 3 days. But Karoline, she didn't post about it. She just placed the award beside the handwritten note from Ellie. A reminder that the world doesn't change when you speak loud. It changes when you speak right. A week after the Civic Courage Awards, Karoline's phone lit up non-stop. Only this time, it wasn't just praise. It was requests, meetings, contracts, political strategists, super PACs, media consultants. Everyone wanted her voice on their side. One call stood out. We're building a national initiative. Truth over noise. You'd be the face of it. We want your image, your quotes, your story. To inspire young voters. Karoline hesitated. Is this about values or winning headlines? The man chuckled. Same thing these days, isn't it? That was her first warning. A week later, Karoline walked through a D.C. metro station and stopped cold. There it was, a giant ad campaign plastered across the wall. Her face, her quote, "Truth doesn't fear a joke, it rises above it." But the bottom? A political logo she never approved, one tied to donors she didn't trust. That night, Nicholas found her pacing the living room. You okay? She turned. They used me. They took something real and made it marketing. He nodded. Then, take it back. Karoline called a press conference. No glitz, no glamour, just her, a podium, and a room full of reporters expecting spin. She gave them fire instead. I stood for courage in the face of mockery, not to be branded, packaged, or used. My words belonged to the people who needed them, not the consultants trying to monetize them. She paused, scanning the room. I'm not running for anything. I'm not selling a slogan. I'm holding a line between using your voice and letting others use it for you. Silence. Then applause, not thunderous, but real. The next day, the campaign pulled her image. But the quote? Too late. It was already out there. Only this time, people were using it for each other, not for a side. Karoline stood backstage at a youth forum in New Hampshire, her home state. The event was called Voice First, where courage meets conversation. This time, there was no controversy, no trending hashtags, just rows of teenagers, wide-eyed, skeptical, hopeful, and in the third row, Ellie, her old college roommate. Karoline caught her gaze. Ellie gave a subtle nod. It meant everything. Karoline stepped onto the stage. No teleprompter, no spotlight tricks, just a chair, a bottle of water, and a standing mic. A year ago, I walked into a comedy show and got mocked on stage. I could have left. Instead, I answered. She looked out across the room. But that wasn't the real beginning. The real moment was way earlier, years before, when someone once asked me, "Why do you stay quiet when people attack what you believe?" And you know what I said back then? Nothing. I just smiled. I let it slide. She took a breath. That smile was the loudest silence I ever gave, and I've regretted it every day since. The room leaned in. So when Jim Carrey threw a joke at me, it wasn't just about that night. It was about every other time I stayed quiet. Every time someone was told, "You're not smart enough. You're too traditional. You don't belong here." She looked toward the teens now, direct, firm. This world will try to shrink you into a headline, a stereotype, a punchline. But you're not here to be laughed at. You're here to speak, and keep speaking, until they have to stop laughing and start listening. The applause didn't explode. It built. From one pair of hands, then another, then the entire room. Not because she asked for it, but because they felt it. Afterward, Ellie approached her. "You know what I realized?" she said softly. "You never changed. You just stopped apologizing for being the same." Karoline smiled. "Took me long enough." As she walked outside, the wind tugging at her blazer, a reporter rushed up. "Karoline, final thoughts for the younger generation?" She didn't stop walking. She just said, "You don't need permission to take the mic, just the guts to speak when it counts." And with that, she disappeared into the New Hampshire dusk, her voice echoing, not in headlines, but in hearts. Sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that was never meant to speak. Karoline Leavitt didn't plan to take the mic that night. She didn't plan to silence a stage or challenge a legend. But when her beliefs were mocked, she stood. Not with outrage, with clarity. She reminded us that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm, steady, and unshakable. Jim Carrey brought the jokes. Karoline brought the truth. And in that clash of spotlight and conviction, something rare happened. A punchline became a turning point. So the next time someone questions your voice, laughs at your values, or underestimates your presence, don't step back. Step forward. Because you were never meant to be the punchline. You were meant to be heard. Thanks for watching Surprising Stories. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, sometimes one sentence is all it takes to shift the room.